form?
I signed it.
Yeah, okay. Yeah, I know. Yeah, I can see it here. Okay, so we are, I'm just not going through all of this, but we are going to audio video record, and then
Sure.
um, we will give you little honorarium. Yeah, and then we will use your interview for publication books, and or even, I don't know, we are planning to write a journal article after publishing this report, and then maybe we could do a webinar together.
Sure.
Because this is quite interesting international comparison. Yeah,
Okay.
and then I did interview with Michael Dezuani this was it on Monday or Tuesday, and
Okay.
then and there's Jiwon Yoon, a co-researcher. She is actually she was the first PhD student from Rene Hobbs, and she did interview with Rene Hobbs, and she really actually really liked these interview questions. And
Good.
Michael also liked it, and then he said
Good.
it was really good process to reflect what has been done in Australia. So,
Good.
but anyway, so we might do that, and it was Rene's idea that we should do a webinar after doing all
Super.
this. Yeah, but
Okay.
anyway,
Fantastic.
yeah, yeah, and so there are research questions. So we put together these questions by discussing in our group. Yeah. So we are doing the research, like the current state of youth media use and policy, cases of overseas policies. We were commissioned by the National Youth Policy Institute. And okay, so you filled in this form very nicely. And so we are just going through these questions. Yeah, and if you uh, discuss, we if we discuss enough, and then we can move on. Yeah.
Okay. I've got the
And
questions. I've got a PDF of the questions open in front of me as well. So
okay, shall I just stop presenting?
it's I've got the question. I'm just telling you I've got the questions here. So yeah, in a way, yes.
Okay.
Um, if that's okay by you, unless you want to do it this way around, it's up to you. Yeah.
No. I want your face on a big screen.
Okay.
Okay, so in
No,
your
no comment. Yeah.
yeah, okay, first question is, in your opinion, who leads the media literacy education in your country, in Britain, specifically for children and twins? So we put like, so in number for this is the same. So we had like Ofcom and Department of Digital Culture, Media and Sport, and UK Council for Internet Safety, and of course Department of Education. And so we found quite a lot of documents and websites, and something like AQA, like what was the like examination board, yeah, and lately like Health Education England. They also have digital literacy website, and Digital Futures Commission. We found like Five Rights Foundation, and so we want to check with you whether this is relevant. Yeah, and of course like Parenting for a Digital Future, and UK Keys Online, Youth Skills. I found that like in mid September there will be a webinar by Sonia Livingston with these people. Yeah. and digital competence framework for educators. Actually, this framework is quite a lot quoted by like coding people in Korea. Yeah.
Right.
And
The which one? The digital competence framework.
yeah, this one.
Yeah.
Yeah. And you gave me an information about the GLIT EY, yeah,
Yeah.
before. So we found this, and also there will be like papers like this. Yeah.
Yeah.
So yeah. So thinking about that, and then so we go back to the question number 1. Yeah.
Yes. So okay. So I think it's a very interesting question because so first of all, you're asking me about Great Britain. And as you know, in legal governance terms, Great Britain is comprised of 4 nations:
Yeah.
England, Wales, Northern Ireland, and Scotland. To some extent, they each have independent individual authority for some of these questions. So I'm mainly going to give you such answers I am going to give. I'm going to give you from an English point of view.
Oh yeah.
They may be different in Northern Ireland or they may be different in
Yeah.
Scotland.
Yeah.
I'm not, I haven't,
You can just focus on England. Yeah.
yeah. So the main thing to answer really is that nobody does. Is the headline information, in as much as
Yeah.
there is no legal statutory responsibility
Yeah.
for the provision of media education or the relationship of media education to democratic participation, or indeed any kind of constitutional basis for an interest in media literacy, digital media literacy, critical literacy, or media education. Yeah. So in some sense, or indeed media literacy, old-fashioned media literacy. So in some senses, the question is a very interesting one because it raises the fact that you have a common practice which everybody in everyday use would accept is important, but there is no statutory legal requirement. There's no underwriting in law. Okay. So and that's important to make the case. This has not always been the case. So there have been times where New Labour government 20 years ago, 15, 20 years ago, for example, did make a commitment to media literacy.
Yeah.
Right. But the nature of the commitment is also carefully hidden away in governance terms from an English point of view. So in this country at the moment, and things will change, I think, slightly soon, media literacy and matters to do with media policy have traditionally been the responsibility of the Department for Culture, Media and Sport. And the main organization that's of concern to anybody outside of the country is Ofcom, the Office for the Regulator for Media for Media. And that has a specific commitment to and responsibility for children and young people, right?
Yeah.
But anything that involves education in this country is the responsibility of the Department of Education, and their media literacy has figured in the curriculum, so it has been a kind of legal obligation for schools to provide, but it has also been taken away and come and gone. And you've cited David Buckingham's work, for example, and we both know for different reasons that David's work over the last 30, 40 years is a very good example of changes in emphasis. David's work in itself could be taken as a historical study for the way that the country has made media education important and unimportant, and then important again, and then important in different kinds of ways. So you can trace the way that media literacy has had different kind of moments in the sun, different kind of enforcement in law, and then ways that it's disappeared again. So at the moment, media literacy is not part of the English national curriculum, although within mother tongue education, English education, there is some emphasis on the teaching and responsibility for understanding the media. within civics education, there is some attention to making schools responsible for teaching some elements of media literacy, but not as a topic in itself, as a commitment to what would be necessary for a person to grow up, a young person to grow up and be a citizen. There is no overarching authority, no governance, no responsibility for that kind of process. So it's very much kind of left open to individual schools, individual families, and in some ways the marketplace, which obviously from an English point of view is taken to be the main form of governance in contemporary British society, rather than any legal or statutory safeguards or authorities. The most explicit and active government promotion of digital literacy and media literacy would be Ofcom, which is, as I said, the regulator in the Department for Culture, Media and Sport, which has had a consistent interest in ascertaining, in evaluating, in measuring the media literacy and of the population. So children and young, and they have often been identified as a particular group. And particular attention has been paid to two features. One is access. So in what sense do people have access to the media, and particularly to digital media? And secondly, safeguarding. So in what sense does their access then expose them to unacceptable levels of risk? And what is the governance of the risks? So there is much more law and much more protection around safeguarding than there is around literacy. So there is a lot of concern around the regulation and control of pornography, of access to children being groomed and abused, to protection of children from paedophiles, and so on and so forth. So there is considerable law and interest in the legal safeguard side of things, but there is not an equivalent kind of interest in the literacy side of things, I would say.
Yeah. Okay. Thanks. And yeah, I think you covered number one, and shall we go to number two? So is there a policy or law? No. You already
I covered number two. Yeah.
Okay.
I mean, historical background is interesting. I don't know whether you want, England is a country that has had a long history of working in media literacy, and there have been developed studies, there have been developed curriculum, there have been developed forms of examination for children and young people. Yeah. There's been masses of academic research. There's a lot of market research. There are a lot of it. England has a great international reputation for media literacy education. But I could not say, with my hand on my heart, that this has come about as the result of a central national state-led interest and responsibility for the topic. Right. So the impact of this has been profoundly piecemeal. And so people outside England shouldn't confuse the quality and range of work, of which is obviously in some cases extraordinary, for a systematic commitment to provide media education, media literacy education for the whole population everywhere in the country. So that's the difficulty I have in a way, we all have in this kind of sense. There have been times when large numbers of children were doing examinable subjects in media education, in media studies. Those times have gone now. I can't remember the statistics, but large, nearly 100. I think at one time there were 60,000 kids a year doing media studies, 40,000 kids a year. I can't quite remember the exact figure, doing media studies GCSE, the exam you do when you're 16. So there have been times when it's been very high profile. Similarly, there have been times when studying the media within English, looking at the newspapers, looking at magazines, looking at adverts, have been very dominant in primary education and secondary education. And again, those moments have been and gone, because what I would say is that this is a field that has been very, very susceptible to changes in fashion and ideology over the last 20 years.
Yeah. Okay. And shall we go to number 3?
Sure.
What are main topics and issues around media education in national curriculum, formal and informal education? Why do you think these topics are significant in your country?
A bit of me doesn't quite know the answer to that question anymore, because I've been you can
talk about like informal.
So historically, so I think there are two ways of approaching this. One is kind of conceptual and theoretical, and the other is kind of practical. So the practical approach has been interested in particular kinds of media. Yeah. So children would have studied advertising or newspapers as a key example about the ways in which texts seek to persuade and influence people. Yeah. They would have looked at newspapers to look at the ways in which arguments are constructed and manipulated and enforced, right? So probably the media that has been most looked at in schools over the last 25 years would be advertising and news. Yeah. But equally, there's been a strong attention to, in recent years, to social media, and also to some extent to film and television. So film and television have also been explored in terms of debate, in terms of the views they give of the world. And this takes me to the other side of the coin, which is what British media education did at the very beginning. And this goes back to its roots coming out of Stuart Hall's work in the Centre for Contemporary Cultural Studies in Birmingham in the 1960s. And that older tradition is that the British approach was not so much to focus on the media, but to focus on the key concepts which explained how communication worked, mass communication worked in mass media societies. So looking at how the institutions of the mass media worked, how audience theory worked, that is how people made sense of the media, how different social groups and different social interests were represented, and the power of and importance of those represented, and finally, what kind of language the media used in order to communicate. And this meant that the study in here, as in other countries, we were very interested in multiple forms of semiosis. So that is how meaning is made visually, orally, verbally, and in terms of language. So understanding the media as the coming together of different kinds of language in that kind of way. So the other way to look at media education is to say it was being organized conceptually, which means it's not so much what media got looked at, but what the underlying principles of how the media work in society that counted. So so there's two ways of looking at it. There, one is like what media, what are this, like what children would look at different newspaper articles or different magazines, or but now, of course, the new social media has become really important, and particularly obviously with debates about fake news and questions about truthfulness and representation are really important. But in some ways, those questions about truthfulness and representation, which underpin debate about so-called fake news, have really been present in forms of media literacy ever since its very beginning. Because the question, fake news is how do some people make some representations of the world seem more truthful than others. And you could just as well say that that's what children were studying when they were looking at newspapers in the 1960s, as when they're looking at Facebook groups about why it's been 5G masts that spread coronavirus. Do you know what I mean? So I would absolutely point to that although the focus of the media have changed, so people will now look at Facebook, or they'll look at Google advertising, or they'll look at the relationship of advertising algorithms to Google, or they'll look at YouTube algorithms, or they'll look at questions around Spotify and piracy and things like that. In some ways, all of those topics in new media also go back to questions in old media. There's a much stronger continuity than people want to pay attention to, which is very disturbing in some ways. Do you want me to talk about pedagogy, or do you want to wait for that for another question?
Can you talk about pedagogy?
I can. So one of the most interesting things about the English approach in some ways is that it always tried to balance attention to making young people critical consumers and critical producers. That it was always as interested in supporting a form of creative education as it was in enforcing a form of critical education. And what I mean by that is that many classroom activities and many forms of curriculum, many forms of syllabus, many forms of teacher training, when that teacher training existed, were definitely focused on helping students become readers and consumers of the media. So it was a question of creating activities to ensure that students understood how the media were constructed, what messages they were conveying, how they were received, what the institutions were. In whose interests messages were being created and circulated. But at the same time, media education, media literacy was very interested in supporting young people to become creative producers of media. So this meant giving them the opportunity to make films, to make adverts, to make newspapers, and to, once they've made them, to broadcast or transmit those media, and then to receive them and create and be involved in media production as well. And particularly, I think one of the main differences between older versions of media literacy and digital media literacy is obviously that digital media make creative media production far more accessible, far more possible, far more easy to accomplish in a classroom. So this means that young people, children and tweens, could reasonably expected to make forms of moving image video, could be reasonably expected to do website design, could reasonably be expected to make different kinds of film or broadcast material, and that the English pedagogy was as interested in helping them learn from their creative experiences as it was in supporting the development of their critical understanding.
Yeah. Okay. So number 4, we have found all that documents.
Sure.
And so do you think it is the core of your policy, like digital framework and everything? So
I think it goes back to the peculiarities of the governance question in the question number 1 you asked, and not that your question isn't peculiar. England is peculiar. So I mean, the thing is, you have essentially a centralized education system, which means that what gets taught in schools legally is what exists in the curriculum, which is governed by the Department for Education. So in some ways, the Department for Education, which controls the curriculum and the tests that measure what kids do in the curriculum, and particularly where they might study media, not as media as a separate subject, but within English or within sociology or within civics, or within geography, those sorts of things. All of those things will be managed, be the responsibility of the Department of Education. But as I said, the Department for Culture, Media and Sport and Ofcom, the regulator, tend to take responsibility for questions to do with internet safety and to do with the regulation, the control of potential harm and risk and things like that. So in some ways, the two ministries run parallel to each other. So in the list you've got there, you have Department for Digital Culture, Media and Sport. You've got Department for Education. So yes, the business side, the digital skills for the digital economy, and that stuff, that comes out, that tends to be more the responsibility of the Department for Business. So it's a bit of a confusing kind of governance relationship. Other things you've got there, like the UK Council for Internet Safety, that tends to be more in the region of not quite NGOs, but kind of government agencies and civil society. So there is a whole set of organizations in civil society. So there's something that Sonia Livingston is involved with at the moment, I know, which is a commission for digital childhood or something, which is run by somebody at the House of Lords. I can't remember who's in charge of that now. So you have a mixture of government departments, government agencies like Ofcom or the UK Council for Internet Safety, which are quasi, that they're government supported, but they're not technically centrally government managed. And then you have other civil society organizations. So in a way, you've got here the examination board, AQA.
Yeah.
But in a way, the examination board is it's a separate business.
Yeah.
But it is regulated through the people who manage education standards, Ofqual. So it's kind of there are different levels of civil society involved, some of which have statutory force, some of which are voluntary, some of which are quasi-government in that kind of sense. There's no overarching, as I say, in some senses, the field of digital media literacy does not exist. It's not a single thing that any one agency or government department takes responsibility for.
Okay.
Other actors, so like you've got here like health education. In some ways, the digital literacy and health education is sort of runs parallel rather than is formally related to the digital literacy and the Department for Education.
Yeah.
Different universities, like the Parenting for a Digital Future, that's an entirely independent initiative run by individual academics of an individual university. It's got no state mandate. The European projects, like you've got the Digital Competence for Educators, and you've got Digility, and you've got Youth Skills, Y Skills, and things like that. Y Skills is actually part of a European project, of which that university is a part, right? So in governance terms, they're at different kind of levels and with different kind of authority, and will bring in different kinds of stakeholders. What's absent from all of these is there are no organizations that involve teachers. There are no there used to be. There are no organizations that involve school principals. There are no organizations that involve other tiers of government. Right, so it's kind of, in some ways, it's quite a thin mixture of different kind of social actors and civil society players.
Yeah, it's nice expression. Yeah, like a thin mixture.
Yeah. Okay. I mean, I think it's. I mean, you're asking me what's happening now. If you'd have, I mean, we both know we've in some ways been having this conversation for 25 years. And at different times over that 25 years, I would have answered this question differently. Or if you'd have interviewed David Buckingham differently 15 years ago or 20 years ago, we would have answered the question differently, because at other times, the topic has been more popular and more present in policy frameworks, excuse me, than it is at the moment. Yeah, so it's just very unfortunate, and it's very unfortunate at the moment because obviously post 2016, the Brexit, the debate about Trump and social media and everything, and Brexit, it's the problem of digital media literacy has is much more politically sensitive.
Yeah. And could you say more about this like the digital framework of the like Department of Business? You mentioned yeah, no, this one, digital competence framework for educators, and how it is how
Well,
it
don't forget that's a European one, and of course England is leaving the England is leaving the European Union.
yes, yeah. And how was it like how much impact did it have in Britain, or was it just document?
On one level, I don't know the answer to that question, but I think on another level, I would say it's just a document, that it's it's an externally produced, so that some people who are interested in this will have found these kinds of documents useful, and this kind of policies are useful because they allow people who want to do something about it to use the documents to justify their cases. But in terms of whether it makes a difference to how many principals up and down school head teachers, principals up and down the country, very little difference. And because they're not really, it's not really a policy document. Okay, a policy document really means something which has statutory effect. This is it's kind of it's in the area of kind of guidance, right? So it's to help teachers or departments or districts or local authorities. It's to help the different governance sectors have access to knowledge and information, but there's no requirement to do any of it. And so policy, I think, is better used in terms of like where there's a statutory or legal requirement to make people do things. And I think what's the problem with this kind of document is whether it's a good document or a bad document, it has no status, it has no power.
Yeah. Okay.
And yeah, I kind of forgot when I was going through the governance things. I mean, Britain obviously is leaving the European Union. So any of those documents have less and less force. But at different times, the European project has been very committed to forms of progressive media literacy as a fundamental defense against totalitarianism and as a fundamental principle of democracy. So and that's about making sure European citizens have the right, that can be both more market driven, like making sure that European citizens can be knowledgeable consumers, but it can also be a question of civic identity, that they understand the role European citizens have the right kind of knowledge and information to enable them to act democratically and to promote institutions of a strong civil society. Europe has been very interested in developing strong civil societies, which means significantly trying to fight oppression and discrimination. So media literacy has often played a part in that, but it's in this country, in England, it often has no statutory force.
Okay. So I think you kind of touched number 5, question number 5. What do you think is particularly doing well in the field of media literacy education in your country? And can you please provide more details on this? I think you already mentioned the theoretical approach, conceptual approach, and I think that was quite powerful because in a way it still gives kind of a good models to other countries. Yeah.
I think what I would say in practice, I mean, good. So, but what I would also say is that I think the general consensus is that when media literacy has been at its most powerful in this country, it has been most powerful offering formal learning opportunities to young people who are older than tweens, like sort of 14 to 16.
Yes.
Right. So where I don't know this. So where it's been at its best, it's had trained teachers, it's had examination subjects, the growth of media studies and related subjects at the university sector has been important in helping give validity and authority to kids who want to go and work in the media, who are interested in studying the media. And where it's been at its best, where the British, the English scholarship has also been at its best, is in looking at that age group. Now, I think other people may disagree that work with younger children has been far more patchy, far less well developed. That primary education and elementary schools neither the conceptual model nor curriculum materials have been as well developed or as well embedded in many schools up and down the country. So I think where the English system has been at its best, it's perhaps been better aimed at older kids rather than younger kids in that sense. Yeah. I think that's a general kind of consensus. Even if we were just to look at the last 25 years, we'd say that.
Yeah, actually, Michael also pointed out that the same thing. So Michael said in Australia, maybe they have focused on older kids and formal schooling, but one of the reasons why you established the digital child center was to try to investigate more on younger children. Yeah,
I think media literacy has also a fundamental sort of modernist, rational principle underneath it, that it's about helping people think and make choices to understand their society. So even though I personally think there's no reason why 3-year-olds can't do that as much as 13-year-olds or 30-year-olds, we all know from practice that the emphasis is going to be on the older student with those kinds of discussions. We also know that because the literacy word is media literacy, digital media literacy, in the primary school, literacy has focused on the acquisition of print literacy, which means it's been much more difficult to put digital media literacy into the primary school, even though there's a fantastic tradition of scholarship. Jackie Marsh,
yes,
for example, or would be the exemplary in that respect, or I could go internationally as well. A fantastic tradition which has shown how the acquisition of print literacy is completely bound up in the acquisition of media literacy and the acquisition of digital media literacy, and it is pointless separating that out. Even though that's true, that has meant it's been more difficult politically for digital media literacy to find its place in the primary school. But the reverse of this is that there is a lot of concern about younger children being exposed to the harms of the internet, and there is a lot of concern about younger children learning how to be digitally competent. I don't think it's literacy, but it's like competence. So there's been more attention in primary education around abuse, harmful content and stuff like that. Although that's equally true for adolescents and older children, because obviously at that age when children are becoming young youth, there are more concerns about the difficult circumstances they might find themselves involved in, and particularly questions around sexuality and sexual abuse, even though they're not at all connected, means that the internet has often been, and online protection has been particularly important for children who themselves are at an age where questions of sexual behaviors become important. So it kind of cuts in a lot of different directions, but there's not a consistent picture. It's not a consistent picture. But I would say that historically, the greater developed forms of media literacy have taken place with older children, I think is a reasonable, and that's also to do with the media teachers. Where's the expertise to come from? From an international comparative point of view, you drew me the digital competency framework that you drew attention to is for educators, right? But where do teachers learn to teach about this topic? Where do they develop subject knowledge? Where do they develop subject pedagogy? Yeah. Right? And there's been very, very few university courses to do this. The fact that you've had a growth in media studies, digital arts, whatever, in higher education does mean that many young people now want to study those subjects in universities. And that has meant that expertise has trickled down into the school system from a labor market point of view, from a creativity point of view, from a industry point of view. But that's not always the same thing. But again, it means that that's why there's been this attention to the older kids in the school system.
Yeah. Yeah, and this afternoon I was having a chat with Ami, and then we both agreed that actually like scholarship in media literacy, I think like England is the best.
But that's a shock. I mean, good. I mean, both you and I should say, in the interest of full disclosure, of course, both you and Ami studied in England, so you may both have.
Yes.
But leaving that aside, Australia's fine as well, but there were peculiar moments where the relationship of the universities, pedagogical content knowledge, the development of syllabus and opportunities made things happen in England. And we know that that's been really difficult in the US. It's been much better in Canada. You should definitely talk to somebody in Ontario and look, because the Ontario is definitely, as a Canadian state, is one of the most progressive sites of media education, and other European countries as well. I mean, Norway or again, which is, I would definitely do that to look at other kind of examples. That there were reasons why what happened in England happened, and it just meant that you had a little bit of a generational moment in scholarship.
Mm-hmm. Okay. So, do you want to say more about number 6, or do you feel that you already
weaknesses or strengths in? I think I've covered, in some ways I've kind of answered that, haven't I? I'd say.
Okay. So shall we go to number 7?
Okay, we shall. So number 7 is around the digital on media education. And I think that's very interesting, because many advances in digital education do not come from a media literacy tradition. So people who are interested in coding, or people who are interested in data, or people who are interested in AI, or people who are interested in a whole range of, say, digital animation skills, often don't come from a media literacy background.
Yeah.
And one of the interesting things is, but there has been incredible money and incredible interest and incredible policy concern with changing the British educational system, the English educational system, to make it more focused on those kinds of topics in recent years, but not from a media literacy point of view. So the concern has not been around critical or creative responses, but more how to prepare kids for a digital future where the world will be what they call digital by default. And also, of course, to support the growth of economic competitiveness of supporting English children to learn how to have the skills to make them competitive. So what's interesting about this is that media literacy has often looked at all the new resources and opportunities in the digital space and thought, oh, how can we make friends with those people to get hold of their money? And similarly, the people in the digital computing sciences have actually ended up discovering lots of features to do with media literacy, which they thought, oh, that's a much better way of teaching things than just teaching them how to use Photoshop. So there's a great, a very nice project called 3D animation, 3D AMI, for example, which I think is a Facebook group, which is run out of UCL Computing Center. And they get kids to use a program called Blender and all sorts of digital animation. This has been the last 3 or 4 years, completely invented by computer science people, right? And they've discovered that all the principles around representation, around creative expression, around audience theory that come from media are the best ways to do their kind of work. So the older media literacy people have used the digital strategically, and the newer digital computing science people have come to the media literacy by default, as it were. What there is a real problem with, and I think you and I have had many conversations about this, is that there are particular features of the digital which can best be explained in terms of digital media literacy. So, for example, how you understand datafication and the role of data. How what the role of code is and the biases in code, the racist, gendered nature of unfair algorithms and things like that. So, and this goes to the heart of some of the debates around democracy, the security of democracy in an age of algorithms where we're all very worried about the ways in which bias and untruth can be perpetuated. And we all feel that there are things that young people need to know about the ways in which they're being governed by algorithms, which is really important. So there are, previously I just went through a sort of argument about the politics of education, about how the computer science people use the media literacy and the media literacy use the computer science. But that I also want to draw attention to the fact that there's this whole new areas of social justice and media, which are very big, are new concepts. So datafication is a new concept that was not really in the same shape or form that it is now when I started being a media teacher, right? Or when you were studying for your PhD. So we both now are very interested in those problems because we think that's where the debate around representation and critical understanding should now move to, even though that topic, that field was not a topic 5 years ago. But I don't know, children are taught about questions of safety and safeguarding, so like not giving information, but why aren't they taught about questions to do with datafication and commodification through surveillance and things like that? So there are new areas that I think are being almost deliberately left off the table, and it's difficult when you have a right-wing populist government not to believe that they're being left off the table deliberately. But obviously, they're also, in some ways, they're quite powerful. So you might have followed the recent debacle here over the A-level results. I don't know whether you saw that in the recent months, because of COVID, kids couldn't do their exams, and because there were and what happened was that the department used an algorithm right. So there were great protests by kids, young people, saying like smash the algorithm, or you know what I mean, or so that in funny ways, being the oppression of being dealt with unjustly actually gave people a great media literacy experience in a way. And apparently that's having a knock-on effect on the ways that algorithms are being used in other welfare circumstances. Because obviously the problem with modern digital media, contemporary digital media, is the ways that it is influencing all sorts of social relations and social decisions. And those areas that have not been taken on by the curriculum, have not been taken on by teachers, and for which we do need new concepts and a new agreement about their importance in our society.
Yeah, that's very important. And
It's work that you're doing.
yeah, and I thought that really we need a new way of looking at, critically looking at the kind of environment that we are now living in. And that's why I became interested in Jerry's project, and also Ms. Koshishin's new media infrastructure literacy lab project. And so
Yeah, and that's why Lucy and I put together the book that you're in, because we feel this is a whole area of scholarship and debate that needs addressing, because it's a gap. It's an extraordinary absence in many school systems around the world.
Yeah. I think you may consider inviting Ms. Koshishin as one of the authors. Yeah.
We've kind of done that. We've got the contract now, so it's kind of maybe okay. Maybe you want to have another conversation about this when we're not being recorded, so we can see what we can do. Okay.
Okay. Yeah. But I'm not pushing you. Okay.
You are. That's fine. It's okay. You should have pushed. I think you should have pushed me earlier. But anyway, that's fine.
Okay. Yeah. At the time, I didn't know exactly what he was doing. So.
Okay. That's
fair.
Yeah.
Okay. So.
Maybe when Lucy's on the panel with him next week.
Yeah. That's why
they'll make a connection, and then we can take it from there. So maybe that would be a good way around that problem.
Yeah. Okay. So so question number 7, 7.1. So can you elaborate further on this question? So can you give more examples? You gave that example of like 3D Army. So can you give more interesting programs or projects that you can
I don't really know the answer to your question about. I mean, I know Sonia's the House of the Information Commissioner. So, like my point about the different ministries involved. Now the digital is run by something called the Information Commissioner. So that's a different ministry and another regulator again. And Sonia Livingston, I know, is running a commission about which is based in the House of Lords. So there's a sort of which is an NGO kind of led. I think there are some industry partners involved in this, like Google has been very interested. Facebook, a little bit less so. But at top levels of government, those big media companies always want to pretend, but they always want to sit down and be part of the kind of discussions and debates, because obviously they're under great threat, and they're very worried about getting into trouble. So they're often happy to play with government. I'm obviously very cynical about this. And it's a real kind of question because of the ways that they have very big money, and it has a big influence on policy. And obviously, there are genuine questions about corruption in this country now, about the ways in which money is given to development of digital marketing and algorithms and things like that, which actually mean that it would not be in anybody in this current government's interest to develop a digital literacy program. I don't know examples. I think it's a great question about the way that parents or other are acting at the school level. I don't know whether groups of parents are going to head teachers and saying, I want my child to know about this or that. What you do get is concern. What tends to happen is the only debate in town is around internet safety. So the debate is always framed in risk and harm to the child. So the UK, the online harms white paper, the Council for Internet Safety, health education, right? These are all usually framed as threats and harms that children need to be protected about. There has been some attempt to move on to move away to a digital rights approach. Again, Sonia Livingston, there's a UNICEF digital rights and a UN digital rights, and somebody like Amanda Third in Australia is very good on this, where the attempt is to move the debate away from a framing in terms of risk or harm. So all you're doing is teaching children to protect themselves, right, towards a model of rights. But the rights discussion tends to be seen in terms of legal regulation rather than education terms. So rights, I think, is a very progressive way to change the debate away from harm, right? It's part of a general asset-based approach to social policy. But I think what tends to happen is that the concern with the rights people the rights scholarship and the rights studies end up trying to have an impact with lawyers and regulators. And that's not always, that often doesn't translate very well into education policy or practice. So it's a really important move, but it's not an easy one to show its effect, is what I'd say. I mean, but I do think it's interesting, the balance between legislation around digital harm and threat and rights. And I think that's an interesting, and it's surprising in a way that the rights agenda has not been taken up more within an education framework. That it's rights is seen as a legal safeguard problem. It's not like it's like which. So I say this here because the internet companies and different civic groups could use rights. I think that rights is a potentially more constructive way to organize than worry about harm, if you see what I mean, because the deficit
it can be right.
Say again?
Digital literacy can be.
Absolutely. Absolutely. It's really important. And I think the difference between a rights and an approach and a threat approach is definitely something which you could say was part of a big sea change in movements. But I don't know. I think it's a great question about collaborative efforts, about families, and what question? Number 7, about parents and schools and society, NGOs and institutions. That you do have agencies. So I came across, and you have some, but I haven't seen a lot of kind of grassroots child-centered rights organizations. I haven't seen this. I haven't heard of or come across accounts of parents at a school who want to change not using Facebook to do parent teachers association. I haven't, you know what I mean? I haven't heard of those examples. And of course, COVID has made things has transformed this, because obviously now you've got digital childhood by default. The questions you've got here have all been transformed because of the way that so much of children's lives are now online.
Yeah.
As you know. as you know better than me.
Okay, so I'm going to moving on to number 8. There are many terms used in the field of media education, like media literacy, digital literacy, information literacy, and many others. So, are there any specific terms used to communicate the unique needs of different educational contexts? Or you can talk about
I think I would say I would add online safety.
Yeah, okay.
Okay, as a version of that, if you see what I mean. But it's clearly not a literacy, even though it's kind of marketed as such.
Yeah.
The date you and I have both started doing work in the data literacy field, and
Yes.
it's actually an inadequate. It's not a very good term to use.
Yeah.
In some ways, the discussion we were just having before about digital rights is another one, because digital rights might be another way of framing digital literacy, right? Yeah. I do agree with you that these terms are important, and historically, we know that many scholars can often get hung up over the ideology of their particular version over others, and it's very difficult, because when you want to make change in an education system, you have to consolidate and you have to normativize concepts. So in some ways, you want media literacy to become banal and everyday, because you want it to be available to everybody.
Yeah,
do you know what I mean? So because it's always remained a marginal topic, nobody really likes the term media literacy. Like I was saying before about primary education and print literacy, right? Literacy means teaching children to read books. I mean, it doesn't conceptually for you or me, but it does for most people most of the time. So we as media educators, I think, have not done a great job in finding better terms to take the argument forward. You know what I mean? Like, it's like we're always like banging our heads against a brick wall. I don't know the answer to this problem, don't get me wrong, right? But I don't think it's been very successful. And some of it, you know, because the language we've used and the policy frameworks, you can get any amount of projects around, you know, online safety, digital well-being, right? There's a whole vocabulary that people find acceptable. Yeah. And those of us that want to get stuck with media or digital literacy are always like shouting when people are riding off into the distance. So it's not been the, retrospectively, I don't know what I'd have done differently, or what David Buckingham would have done differently, or whatever, but it's not been very helpful. So I don't know, the digital rights, I think people have decided to try on, because it's like, it's an, as I say, it's an asset-based rather than a deficit-based. It's not an online, you know, way of language, but who knows? I do think the rights thing is an interesting thing to take forward, though. I'm interested, you know, I don't know.
Okay. This point, question for you. Tom prefer media literacy.
Sorry, you're just breaking up a bit a second. So do you want to just say that again?
So which term would you prefer between media literacy and digital literacy? Because it's a big question when we try to frame school curriculum and policy. Yeah. Some people say media literacy is bigger term, or some other people would say differently. And in a way, I think there are some overlaps, but there are different agendas in these two different terms.
Do you know something? I think in the writing that I've done, I actually, in a funny sort of way, have more difficulty over the literacy rather than the digital or the media. So, so I have real. I suppose if you're like forcing me to make a choice, everything is digital now, so digital is the biggest category, right? But I don't really care, because I think the real problem is literacy. Like, is literacy particular? Literacy comes out of a particular historical moment when people started writing and using silent communication through word, through written texts, and the literacy, the franchise, making more and more of the population literate, had a profound social effect in all sorts of ways. There's an incredible relationship between the way we think, the way we feel, who we are, and literacy, right? Whether we're using that as a metaphor when we talk about the media, or whether we're using it in terms of the digital, or whether we're saying something very deep about the way people think and understand, I still don't know on one level. So it's not what I'd prefer is a term that everybody accepts, that allows for a creative and critical curriculum and a creative and critical pedagogy. If it was called digital rights, I wouldn't really care, if you see what I mean. What I care about is getting teachers and parents and citizens and students and school principals and politicians to understand that it's a complex process of communication, of power, of meaning making, of different kind of texts. If literacy is the best word to explain all that, fine. If it isn't, fine.
Yeah, because I'm teaching my first year students. The subject is called, the course is called like digital media and communication, not media literacy.
Okay. And they like it, and if it was called media literacy, they wouldn't come.
I think they might come if they are the fourth year students, but not the first year students.
So we should all be
honest.
No, I was going to say dishonest, strategic about this. No, I think you're right. I mean, that we don't have great it's interesting, we haven't got a commonly accepted. Look, here we are in 2020 in the middle of a pandemic where half the world is online for most of the time, where all of our lives are ruled by digital media, and where the consumption of media is central to all of our lives, and we haven't even got a term to describe it, right? We're arguing over whether digital literacy is the right term. It's completely weird. Or UNESCO have their MIL or whatever. You know what I mean? It's completely. It's just bizarre that we cannot name the communication structure and its relationship to power and meaning. It's completely weird.
Yeah, we should keep pretending that we know.
We should. Yes. All right. Okay. I'll keep quiet on that.
Let's do that. And number 9. So, are there any collaborative efforts, networks, or alliances?
So I'm a bit out of touch with this, right? So I've told you about the.
But I think it's like a British alliance of like media education or something.
Is there?
I don't.
Well, there's the Media Education Association.
Okay. I think that was that. Yeah.
Media
Education Association. So can you?
But so that was, but that's like quite a small group of quite old people, mainly.
Just so honest.
But the point is, it has a generational formation, right? There must be online
You can talk about like Julian McDougall.
Yeah, so the University of Bournemouth Centre is the CEMP, the Centre for
Yeah.
Education and Media
Excellence or something.
in Media Practice.
Yeah.
There are some groupings of, there are very few places to study to be a media teacher or a digital media teacher, because for a variety of reasons to do with changes in teacher education and the curriculum in this country. There used to be centres in London at the English and Media Centre. Goldsmiths used to have a teacher training course with Jenny Graham at the English and Media Centre.
Is it gone or
Hmm?
is it still English and Media Center? Is it still
I don't think it is the English and Media Centre anymore. I think it's become the English. I think that's gone. I mean, Jenny's retired.
Okay.
There are a few examples of super educators and people that keep going. Of course, mainstream, the reverse of this is that mainstream higher education, the other way of looking at this problem is that more universities have much more developed, consolidated critical digital literacy departments for older students.
Yeah.
Right. So you can't necessarily find things for kids, for children, or for teachers, but you can go to places like Leeds or King's College or the LSE or
yes,
any number of universities in the country, and you can Coventry, Bristol, you can find west of England, that is, you can find fantastic examples of radical, critical education stuff. The Cardiff University of Cardiff has a fantastic centre called about digital data justice lab.
Digital data.
The data justice lab, right? So you can find in higher education all sorts of scholarship and activities around civic promotion of civic understanding of digital media literacy and the engagement of young people, students, in radical programs of critique and creativity, right? So that's positive.
Yeah.
What you can't find is that those universities and those scholars and those practices have an influence on teacher education or curriculum reform, because the last 25 years, 30 years has seen a fantastic consolidation and centralization of education by central government. Okay, so the politics of the neoliberal forms of governance in this country have meant that control over education, the kind of public good questions you're asking, are not in the public domain. They're held by central government. Right? So, but you will, like I say, Leeds University, the Cardiff Data Justice Lab, there are all sorts of really exciting digital literacy, digital rights, whatever we're going to call it, stuff going on, just not for kids, not for schools, not for teachers.
Yeah.
Right? There are a number of small companies. I came across one the other day called Foxglove, which is like a little company devoted to fighting data injustice. Right? There's no shortage of civil society and university level institutions engaged in broad critical digital literacy projects. Right? That's not the problem. The problem is having that wealth of commitment and participation and activism present within the stakeholders who work with children and young people. Right? And so that has been the problem in that sense. So Britain England as a society is by no means completely screwed, but the school system has become much less susceptible to the kind of interventions and activist engagement that we saw 25 years ago, 20 years ago around media literacy, that the kind of work that you, when you came to this country and you met up with, and but especially embodied in the character of David or people like Kerry Bazalgette or Jenny Graham, where you have kind of genuine activist educators who are grounded in a school system and have authority and responsibility to do stuff. Those moments, those opportunities have gone. But what you have got is much better work in higher education, and you have got a range of social organizations, as I said, like this Foxglove thing I saw, or and you will find, and British civil society is still engaged in these sorts of things.
What's Foxgloves? Is it
Foxglove is a little kind of agency or part. I just came across it the other day as an example of hold on a second, let me give you the, it's devoted to like exposing foxglove.org to exposing digital injustice.
Can you
hold on, let me put it in the chat.
Okay. Okay.
So it's not, I mean, it's an example of it's probably a company for all I know, but it's an example of kind of digital activism.
Okay.
Right. So you will find digital activism or digital literacy activism powerfully in many places in this country. That's not the right. I wouldn't suggest otherwise.
Okay.
But not in the school system.
Okay. I can't find the website.
Really?
Yeah. Can you give the link?
Yeah, sure. I'm just doing that now.
Yeah. Oh. Okay.
I'm trying to make the point about civil society and organizations outside of the formal education system.
Okay. Okay, so going to number 10. Okay. So in regards to the unique educational situation posed by the pandemic, has there been any emerging issue or policy on media literacy education?
Not as much as I've been able, as you might imagine. So the key questions around the pandemic were around, in respect of media, were around access. So there have been, because the pandemic has thrown the injustice of our societies back in people's faces, it has raised a number of questions about children has every child got access to a laptop? Can every child study at home? Those sorts of things. Of course, really what it comes down to is that you find out that many children just don't have enough food to eat at home. So worrying about laptops is a little bit
luxury.
Not a luxury, but it's like so that's one issue that has come up as around the digital divide. The second thing that's come up is around the ways in which private and public schooling is profoundly unequal, so that I read one statistic which said that there was between a 6 and a 79% difference between the number of the kids that had online education during the pandemic. In other words, some schools in poorer areas, the notion of schooling being something which could operate online was so alien and so impossible in those situations that many kids lost out completely. So that's the second thing. And then the third thing has been around well-being. So the question about children's mental health suffering during the pandemic.
Yeah.
And that's often revolved around the screen time problem, like our children spending too much time online. But now you've got a real problem because actually they have to be at school by being online at home. So you can't, the silly concept of screen time has to be taken to pieces a bit.
Yeah.
So it hasn't, to the best of my knowledge, actually created a media education response, right? You would think in some ways that would be a perfectly right, but there have been responses around how to balance my a lot of parenting, a lot of public blogging around balancing children's activities. There's been a lot of questions about public-private differences in wealth and the way that kids with more money can have access to different kind of resources. And there's been arguments particularly about the very basic questions about physical access to the digital.
Yeah. And Lisa Corvin is going to talk about that, in
Good.
webinar. And
Good. Well, she's got three. Yeah.
So actually, I'm going to now we put together all the slides of the presenters, and so I will send them to
Okay, fantastic, lovely.
Yeah, I specifically asked the presenters to write the speakers' scripts for the translators and discussants.
Yeah.
And so it's quite, and all the presentations are beautiful.
Good. Good. Yeah, of course they are. You're in charge of that. You're now becoming a very skillful curator of
Thanks.
Events.
Fantastic translators. Thanks to you.
Say again.
Fantastic translators. You recommended. Yeah. So.
Oh, the woman from
the
House of Dreams.
Yes. So I got her. Yeah.
I thought she was great. I liked her, and she seemed like interested in the topic.
Yeah. And now I got her CV, entire CV, and that was really great. Yeah, and she had all the interesting experiences, and so
cool.
She,
what's her name again?
Park Ji-young. Yeah, Ji-young Park.
Okay. She had a. Okay.
Yeah.
Anyway, good, fantastic.
And she was she's sending her regards to you.
Please say hi to. I'm very pleased that. Well, I'm pleased that I, made the connection to go back to her. So good.
Yeah.
I hope that one day I'll be able to come to Korea again in the near future, and
yeah, and we will get her to.
Excellent. Poor woman. Okay, excellent.
Yeah. Anyway, and so question number 10.1. So as a media education expert, what do you think about the governmental efforts, policy, or program in your country since the pandemic began? Very poor.
Okay, one word, rubbish, I think is no, but this you're talking to, I don't know what Renee said in America, but I mean this country's had a poor, has not come out of the pandemic well. Okay. I don't know what you would say about South Korea, but it managed things better than. I mean, it's not an easy thing to do. Okay, nobody's going to come out of this well, but it managed that the overall management of the pandemic has been poor. The overall management of the schools situation has been very poor. So only today did the Prime Minister decide that they had a regulation that you didn't have to wear masks in school, and now the Prime Minister has given in and agreed that you can wear a mask in school. Now, for you, that must seem like crazy, because it's like, why wouldn't you wear a mask in school? I mean, you know what I mean? So
Yeah.
if you're talking about a country that has only on August the 26th decided that you can wear masks in school, what do you think they've done about media education or online learning?
Yeah.
Okay, so I mean, it's just it's just so backward here.
Okay.
I don't know what poor Rene had to say about the US.
Yeah.
I was told a friend of mine has young children, and Jessica, and she wrote to me yesterday that in her school district, teachers have been told they have to work at home, which means they have to pay for carers to look after their children at home in order for them to be able to.
Sure.
I mean, right, right, okay, but I mean, if you think that that is I mean, to be fair, I think those things need to be sorted out before you you worry. I mean, they clearly need to have a strategy of getting teachers to learn how to work together to teach online. Teacher training. I talked to Sue Bennett in Wollongong. I don't know about this country. Needs to have strategies, a unit of work, so that when you become a teacher in the future, you have to have done some study in how to teach online as well as teach face to face, right?
Yeah.
Because this is going to happen again.
Yeah, I totally agree with you.
Right? Okay. You have to teach teachers how to work with each other, because in a school, the main business of a school is having a timetable so that one teacher is in charge of 25 children or 30 children in one room. You don't have to worry about that with if they're all at home. But
Yeah.
so you need a different understanding of how you timetable and how you work with kids and how you organize communication with kids. So some of it is great. Some children have done really well with online learning. For some subjects, for some children, of course, it's going to be better than what you get in school. But other things get lost completely. I don't think people have had the ability to have those discussions. I don't think they've been asked to have those discussions. And I think it's a real kind of problem. But like I said, the level of, given what the concerns are about wearing masks or wondering how your children as a teacher are going to be looked after, I have no, you know what I mean? It's just been, this country's just been very, very poor.
Yeah. Yeah, so in a way, I thought that like pandemic raised all the questions about education
Yes.
that we thought that might happen in the future
Yes.
with the technology. But
Yes.
no, but
And
this pandemic just made us realize that this technology is just around us. We just don't know how to use it well.
absolutely. I completely agree with you that in some ways, it should enable us to move to change how we do schools. Like, rather than worrying about timetabling, we should worry. We should worry about the difference between learning which is individual and learning which is collective,
Yeah.
right? Because I think digital technology, online learning, is fantastic for individuals,
Yes.
right? But school is more than just about individuals. So you need to like balance those sorts of things.
Yeah. I think so.
But I agree with you completely that the pandemic should, in a way, help us. But you can just see how terribly conservative responses are to what schooling, getting back to normal. They don't want to change anything. They just want to get back to normal. And obviously, normal is better than now. I'm not arguing. I mean, but really, you could use this as a fantastic opportunity to change what teaching you understand by teaching or whatever.
Okay, moving on to the next question. So, what kinds of governmental efforts, policies, or programs do you think are necessary in your country and why?
What number are we on? Number 9.
No, 10 to 10.2.
Okay, well, in some ways we've just been talking about that, really, in a way, haven't we? So
Yeah.
I would change teacher education.
Okay.
I would help teachers learn to work with each other. I would also, in some ways, it would be more cost effective to have better central resources. So there is no doubt that some of these market options, like Khan Academy, right,
Yeah.
in some cases, under teacher control, why wouldn't you just use those? Because that would be better than teachers making up PDF worksheets. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Because some of these things you just need a lot of resourcing, right? But what you need is for teachers to understand what this kind of education can do and what it can't do. And then if you were just doing that, what you would then do in the time, you know, so you could then mix and match. So I definitely think you need a review process for teachers to work together in teams, that schools need to become learning communities to help teachers build their expertise. You need access. You need very basic questions dealt with, like the access question. You need every teacher to do a course on what learning with a screen could mean, both positively and negatively. You need all teachers to have understandings of what screen time might mean and things like that, you know?
Yeah.
I mean, it seems to be a fantastic opportunity. As you said, it's a fantastic opportunity in a way to go back to first principles about what you want to happen in a school and what you want to, you know, and to think about individualized learning and collective learning.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think
I think
last
last
semester
semester
I
I
had a
had
great
great time
to
to
reflect
like.
my own teaching and
Yeah.
change my teaching.
No, you've obviously, I mean, we're friends, obviously, and I noticed in some of your blogging and things, your posts, you've obviously in some ways found it quite exciting.
Yeah.
You've enjoyed, you have, right? I mean, it's a horrible reason, but you have. And I remember that picture you've got of your new office with the microphone and the lights and the, right? You've actually found it really helpful as a way of breaking from what you did before. It's made you do different things.
Yeah, and I felt much freer in a way and more comfortable, and also I think I wasn't very comfortable when I was teaching in a big lecture room, and it and I was feeling I was not really communicating with individual students, you know, in
Right.
a traditional classroom. But I'm communicating much better with individual students. Yeah, and I
Okay.
really good feedback last semester from my students.
And you think your teaching improved then?
Yeah. And also, I was caring more emotionally my students.
I
Yeah,
don't know that that's a good thing, because I mean, I don't mean you shouldn't care, but I worry
yeah,
you know,
yeah. But
I
you
mean,
know,
you probably cared for the wrong reasons, if you see what I mean, because you were taking responsibility for things you couldn't.
yeah, but because of the like access question, so I was worrying if my students can access to this like screen education really well. So if they know how to deal with this platform and things like that. So particularly in the first and second week, and then I was caring more individually. Yeah, but sometimes
I think one of the things that schools should do, obviously, is do an audit of their students' online
yeah,
capabilities. So
yeah,
every school should know exactly what a child has, you know, whether they've got a mobile phone or whether they've got a tablet or whether they've got a broadband or whether they haven't got any food, and they should know those sorts of things. And so
I did questionnaires for the students. Yeah, so
yeah,
so I
just
was
to,
even asking, where are you? Where
yeah, Have you got a room?
My course, yes. Are you at home or in your bedroom alone, or are you in with other people and things
Exactly.
like that? Yeah.
Exactly. Exactly.
Yeah.
And that's kind of straightforward on one level, but
Yeah.
yeah.
Anyway, so last question. If you go to the last page, we found many
Yeah. The Ofcom.
yeah, so children's media literacy report.
Yep. The Ofcom stuff is great.
Yeah. And so do you think this is enough, or do we miss some important survey or like
The only other thing you should know about is the UNESCO. You know, they've got a very big consultation program about education 2050. Do you know about this?
yeah.
So you should perhaps look at that.
Mhm.
I have the OECD thing. I've written a chapter for. I've worked with them now, and I think their stuff is great.
Can you give any thing that I can read about that?
The OECD. You've seen the 21st Century Childhood. You've got the 21st Century Childhoods.
Yeah,
There's a website. They've got one book. They're doing another book that I've contributed to.
okay.
Do you want to read the chapter I wrote?
Yeah.
It's on play and learning.
Yeah. Can you give a website, or
It hasn't come out. It hasn't. It's being done at the moment.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
So they have the 21st Century Childhood website.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Let me.
Hold on. Let me see if I can.
Oh, I found it.
There you go. Yeah. And the UNESCO thing. There's a lot of UNESCO stuff.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, 21st Century Children. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
Website. Yeah. So the stuff that I've written will come out there soon.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
In England, I've only really come across these. Besides the UNESCO stuff, the Ofcom has been the best. Okay. Is the only stuff I've really come across. I'll be honest with you.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
So yes, is the answer to your question. I mean, like you seem to have done. If I come across other things, I mean, I look. I mean, I also The Guardian. Mm-hmm. I mean, there's a lot of stuff around in the reports about, because they often report on studies like about the way that women. There was a good report recently about women suffering under COVID, looking after children and things like that.
Yeah. Okay.
And that was all reported in The Guardian. So I would do some searches.
Okay. Okay. Thanks.
That's all right.
Okay. So
have I been a good interviewee?
Yes.
Okay.
Good informant.
I don't know that I trust you. We're friends now. I don't know that I can trust you, but okay.
Okay, I will just stop recording here, and then we can
chat.
continue.